Daniel Carter glanced at his phone for just a second. When he looked up, his son was gone. Panic hit him as he searched the park. Then he saw Ethan, sitting beside a homeless man. And when Daniel realized what the beggar was doing, his blood ran cold. Daniel Carter was a man who had everything money could buy, yet he never seemed to have time for his son. Since his wife passed away 2 years ago, he had buried himself in work, building an empire, believing that providing financial security for Ethan was enough. But Ethan didn't care about business deals. He only wanted his father's attention. That morning, Ethan had pleaded for a real day together. But even here, in the middle of a park, Daniel had one ear on his phone and the other barely registering his son's voice. When his assistant called about an urgent investor meeting, he took one step away, one moment of distraction, and that was enough for Ethan to disappear. Now, as Daniel sprinted through the park, calling his son's name, a wave of guilt and fear hit him harder than any business setback ever had. Strangers noticed his distress, some offering to help, others recognizing him from magazine covers as a ruthless businessman. But none of it mattered. Nothing mattered, except finding Ethan. Then, through the sea of people, Daniel finally spotted Ethan sitting on a worn-out bench near a street musician. Relief flooded him, but when he saw who Ethan was with, his stomach twisted. Next to Ethan sat a disheveled, bearded man in ragged clothes, carving something small with a pocket knife. His hands were rough, his coat tattered, and he looked every bit the homeless man Daniel would have ignored on any other day. But Ethan wasn't afraid. He was laughing, completely enchanted by what the man was making. Daniel rushed forward, ready to grab Ethan and pull him away. But before he could say a word, Ethan turned to him with bright eyes and said, "Daddy, look, Mr. Jack is making me something special." Confused and still on edge, Daniel looked closer. The man, Jack, was holding out a small wooden figure of a ship, intricately carved despite his rough hands. "I found your boy wandering alone," Jack said, his voice calm but firm. "He was scared, so I thought I'd keep him company until you came back." Daniel felt a mix of relief, embarrassment, and something else he couldn't quite name. Sitting down next to Ethan, Daniel finally looked at Jack, not just at his worn clothes, but at his calm dignity. Jack explained that he used to be a woodworker, a craftsman who once owned a thriving workshop before tragedy struck. A fire destroyed his business, and without insurance, he lost everything. Now he lived on the streets, carving small figures to sell for food. Ethan clutched the tiny wooden ship, fascinated. "It's like the one Mummy used to have," he whispered. Daniel's breath hitched. He hadn't thought about that ship in years. His late wife had once bought a similar wooden carving from a street vendor, saying, "The smallest things often hold the biggest meaning." For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt something shift inside him. Jack had nothing, yet he had taken the time to comfort a lost child, while Daniel, with all his wealth, had neglected the one person who needed him most. That night, as Daniel tucked Ethan into bed, he held the wooden ship in his hand, turning it over thoughtfully. "What if I'd been focusing on the wrong things?" he murmured to himself. The next morning, Daniel made a bold decision. Instead of finalizing a cold-hearted real estate deal that would displace a struggling neighborhood, he called his assistant and ordered a rework of the project. He wanted to include community spaces, local artisan markets, and workshops. His investors were furious, warning that he would lose millions. But for the first time, Daniel didn't care about profit margins. He cared about purpose. Later that week, he went back to the park with Ethan, hoping to find Jack. When they did, Daniel surprised both Ethan and himself by offering Jack a job. "I don't believe in handouts," Jack said, hesitant. "This isn't charity," Daniel replied. "It's an investment in talent, craftsmanship, and second chances. I want you to teach people, kids like Ethan, how to carve, how to create something meaningful. Jack studied him for a long moment, then finally, for the first time, smiled. Months later, at the grand opening of the revitalized community space, Jack stood beside Daniel and Ethan, watching families gather to see the new artisan workshops. There were woodworkers, painters, and craftsmen, people who had once struggled, now given an opportunity. Ethan proudly held up his latest carving, a tiny wooden house. "For our new home, Daddy," he said. Daniel's throat tightened. For the first time in years, he truly understood what his late wife had meant about the small things holding the biggest meaning. As the sun set over San Francisco, Daniel realized that he had built more than just buildings. He had rebuilt his life. And it all started with a moment of carelessness that led to an unexpected meeting with a beggar who wasn't a beggar at all, but a teacher, a craftsman, and a reminder of what truly mattered. Sometimes, life has a way of reminding us what truly matters, through the most unexpected people. Daniel thought he had everything, but it took a stranger to show him what he was really missing. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments. What's one moment in your life that changed your perspective forever? Let's share our stories and inspire each other.